Well, why don't I just welcome everybody to our workshop today on how to do compensation negotiation with startups. Thank you so much for signing up and joining us. We have our facilitator, Teresa Duke. We have a full hour ahead of us. We're going to run from 12 p.m. Pacific time till 1, or if you're on East Coast, 3 to 4. Today's format is going to basically be a presentation. There's going to be lots of content shared, but there's also going to be some breakout exercises to for one thing, discuss a few things, some past experiences you might have had, but also to apply some of the frameworks and learnings from today. And what we'll do for Q&A is save them for the end, but what you can do is feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll note them, and then we'll revisit them when it comes time for questions. So that way you don't lose them when they come to you. So feel free to drop them in there. And with that, why don't I say, if you do want to participate, feel free to leave your cameras on. And if you don't, feel free to turn them off and you can be a passive listener. But with that, let me hand things over to Teresa, and she'll get things started.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. So we're going to talk about compensation negotiation, specifically with startups, but this will work beyond startups for you as well, too. So first of all, a little bit about me. If you haven't met me before, my name's Teresa Duke. I'm here over in Vancouver, and I got a few years. I've been banging around in the tech and video game and entertainment industries, and currently working as an executive and leadership coach with companies like Netflix and at Amazon and some other places like that, and companies that you wouldn't hear of, as well as doing some recruiting currently right now for Clio, one of the local tech companies in Vancouver. I've headed up HR, so I've seen the outside, I've seen the inside, and I've worked with people who are trying to find that perfect match as well, outside and inside their careers as well. And so if you're curious about getting a hold of me, because we're going to go through a lot of information today, you're going to probably want to stay close to the end, because we're going to have some little pocket phrases and things that you're going to want to be able to capture to be able to come back with some wonderful responses with the recruitment and hiring process. But you can find me on LinkedIn and teresa@teresa.com. Okay, so let's get started. So our agenda, we're going to give you a recruiter perspective today. So a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, but with the empathy of being a coach, helping people from the outside search as well, and also going through searches and negotiations and salary negotiations myself. They can be terrifying, they can be annoying, but we can definitely put some good things in them. So ideally, reduce your distractions so you can focus. Because there's a lot of information, you might want to have something handy to take notes, or at times maybe screenshot what you're seeing on your screen, because there'll be some really interesting meaty information, or take a picture with your camera. But I do know the team at Commit will be sending the slides to you later. But if something jumps out at you, just go ahead and jump in there and take a picture, because we're going to zoom through it. And we're going to have one breakout room. It'll be great. Build your network, build your connections. It'll be a way to warm ourselves up, talk about compensation, talk about salary negotiation. But we'll only have one breakout for this. The rest will be lots of information. And interacting in the chat, go for it. The more interacting in the chat, the more fun it is. And then, yeah, and if you've got questions, Daniel and Lauren will be able to help you with that. And we'll do the questions at the end. So I'm just going to upload a couple things on my little menu here, because I want to make sure that I see the chat. Here we go. And then we should be good to go. Awesome. Now I can see the chat and I can see all of you. Great. Okay. So first of all, I'm just curious. Nope, let's click on the screen here. There. All right. I'm curious. Besides, actually, no, let's go back one. There we go. Have any of you ever winged? I talked about this with Aldrich at the beginning. Have any of you ever winged a salary negotiation? Throw in the chat. You can put a yes, and there's no embarrassment here because I have. Yeah. Nope. Awesome, Nolan. Wing. Oh, not really prepare. Just be like, be hoping that the company is going to tell you what the salary is going to look like, and that'll inform your decision. Yeah. Yeah, especially at the beginning of your career, right? So super popular. Okay, well, it can get really expensive to wing it, which is why you're all here, because you're all super smart, right? One HBR study found that for a new employee, negotiating a salary offer up by $5,000 in that initial negotiation could make a huge difference over the course of a career. So if you did this at 25 years old, you negotiated up $5,000 in a job market, and so you got to about $55,000 over the course of a 40-year career, you'd earn about $634,000 more than an employee that negotiated to $50,000 in that first inception. That's kind of interesting. I don't know the math on it, so you don't have to ask, but I have the study if you're curious. And then I'm curious, besides salary, so we talk a lot about salary, but we know there's more than salary. Can anyone tell me what you think compensation is? Has anyone ever thought of things in terms of the terms of compensations? Holidays? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Healthcare, Martha, right? Equity? Yes. Perfect. Perfect. So all the other things. That's right. So just to be clear, because when we talk about negotiating compensation, I want to make sure that we're clear on what compensation actually is. Okay. So as a definition, compensation refers to monetary payment given to an individual in exchange for their services. So in the workplace, it's what's earned by employees, including salary and wages, commission, any incentives or perks that come with your position. But there's two main parts I like to split it up to when we're talking about negotiation. So one is the monetary part. And so the monetary part incorporates salary and benefits, equity, monetary sweeteners, all sorts of things like that. In terms of sweeteners, what I mean like that would be like signing bonus, office setup, work from home allowances, things like that. Okay. There's a lot to that. And I know I'm going fast, but we're going to get into the negotiation piece. And then non-monetary perks, right? And a lot of people talk about perks, but for our purposes, we're looking at remote and flexible hours. Yes, Nolan, travel to fun places. Yes. And cool tech gear, you know, that would be like the non-monetary, at least for you, because the money that is being spent by the company. And other examples, employee discounts. You know, what would be the difference with startups, however, is some of them don't have a lot of cash. So they tend to have a little bit more emphasis if they do stock on stock. Some don't actually. They would have more emphasis on stock and perks, and they can be a little bit creative. But sometimes you'll find people jump into startups as a leadership team, and they've come from big organizations where they've seen a really poignant value to a perk that tends to be associated with a big company, and they'll bring it in. So being curious and asking, you might not know, but there might be extra perks out there for you. So in order to get ourselves warmed up, meet some people, build your network, which is huge. Don't get me started on building your network. I'll go nag on that one. We're going to just do a little breakout room right now. And how many people have we got in our group here today, Daniel?
We're up to 23, but excluding me, you, and Lauren, that makes 20. Okay,
20, perfect. So let's do 3 groups of 3. And are you okay to set that up, Daniel? 3 groups of 3, and we're gonna do it for about 6 minutes. And then when we come back, we're gonna talk about this top challenging experience. So a lot of you have winged your compensation negotiation before, or your salary negotiation. So most of you will have a whoops or a challenging experience from what you've been talking about in the chat. And if you don't have one, you can always share with friends. But we'd love to put you off in these breakout rooms for a little bit, and take some time to take turns, one person each. You'll have about 2 minutes each to share. Okay, so 2 minutes each, 6 minutes, 3 people in a room. Share your top challenging compensation negotiation experience. Ready? Let's do it. So that was really, really fascinating. I could talk about my group, but that would be like all about us. Let's see. How about who am I going to volunteer? And you can say no, you can say yes to talking, or you can say pass. Okay, because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. And Nolan, do you want to go first? Share something that you learned, like in terms of your group.
The group, well, I learned that one of us is like ridiculously lucky or karmatic or something. Ended up being in reverse negotiations each time, and they offered higher than what he asked for. So don't know how you pulled that off.
I'll have to get their number. That's awesome. That's awesome. Anything else you want to share, Nolan?
No, I think that was like the takeaway for me.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing. How about Sarah? What did you find anything interesting in your group?
Yeah, Isaac and I were in the breakout rooms by ourselves, or just the two of us rather.
Nice.
And I was telling Isaac, a story about a friend of mine who was a senior cloud architect. He'd been at a company for a few years, then went to a new company, and his salary doubled. Just the base salary doubled, but he told the new company also, he said, well, you don't have benefits. So I don't know about this because, I have 2 children and all this stuff. And they said, okay, well, we'll just put another $15,000 on your, on top of your salary. So it was double plus 15.
That's really good. FYI, benefits, depending on the package, if it's pure benefits, can be anywhere between 15 to 30% in addition, if they don't have them. FYI.
Yeah,
that's a great
good thing. I come up with few fictional children now.
Yeah. Well, other dependents, right? Don't have to be kids, right? Looking after a sick, relative or something like that. Who knows? And Manjeet, what'd you find out?
Yeah, I learned from Nick and Emmy. So mainly sometimes talking, going to your employer and telling them like how you are feeling about the whole thing, because sometimes they might not be aware of your situation. So yeah, talking does help. So bringing it to their attention and then seeing it from their perspective, how they are seeing it. So that can actually go a long way as well.
Wisdom of the group. That's absolute transparency. It's getting in their shoes. That's one of the reasons that I'm doing this, is so I'm helping you get in, see behind a little bit. That's wonderful. Anyone else want to share?
I can just offer, thinking of health benefits and things. For a long time, I was the primary caregiver for my handicapped brother. And I often negotiated less salary for more vacation time so that I could care for him. And it was a strategy to do that, so we could both live independently, and recognizing that it would require time from work anyway.
Yep.
So I might offer to take less if they gave me more compensation that way, and excellent healthcare.
That's beautiful. See, we talk about startups requiring some creativity, but so do people, right? So we're going to talk about this later in terms of what's important to you. In my group, I found it really interesting. I was expecting, war stories of, conversations that went wrong, and both people talked about a successful negotiation. And that was the most challenging thing, because they had to stand up for themselves. They had to be willing to take the gamble that this might not work out, but this is my stake in the ground, or these are my principles, and this is what I'm not willing to negotiate. And it was super inspiring. My story was just we're going to talk about preparation a lot later. And mine was just, I did the math wrong. I didn't double check my math, and it ended up costing me 30% of compensation for 7 months, which was ridiculous, but I had to own it because I didn't prepare appropriately. So you learn the hard way, right? Wonderful. So
I had a question. Regarding around the psychology, because when you're applying for jobs and there's jobs that you really want, and then some people kind of devalue yourself because it's a job worth getting or something, that type of thing.
You make a list of what it is you're going to negotiate, and what your not negotiables and non-negotiables, what you will not and what you will compromise on, and it will be different for different companies, right? So everyone here is involved in development engineering, so simple list, and then putting percentages or scoring against what's really important to you. And I'm going to give you more categories and information as to what can make up that list as we go through. But that's a super great question. And remember, we're going to leave time for questions at the end. I'm going to try for 10 minutes. So even though I'm whipping through, we'll have 10 minutes, and then you can always have me one-on-one anytime you want. Sound good? Awesome. Great question, Aldrich. Good. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. Here we go. Share. Wonderful. Okay, great. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get into how to do it. And remember, compensation negotiation is very complex, very broad, very unique. So we're going to give you things that are going to help you take principles and then apply them into your unique situations. And sometimes some of your questions will be answered, sometimes all of them won't be, but we'll do our best to give you a broad overview and then drill in where we can. So we've come up with a framework we're calling PIC, okay? So this is something I use with clients, and it stands for prepare, which I've already kind of mentioned already. Invite the company to dance. You're like, oh, please, Teresa, don't be cheesy, but I promise it won't be cheesy. And then the last one is collaborate, okay? And so in terms of the first piece of it, we're going to cover off prepare. And prepare, you know, with expert negotiators, they take time ahead of time to research, not like I did that one time, and prepare as much as possible. This way you can find levers to pull and also look good. We recruiters love to speak to people who know a lot about the company and what's going on and what we're doing in a good way, okay? So prepare has 4 parts to it, you can see below, and we're going to start first with comp, which is compensation. We've already defined a bit of compensation already, but when we prepare, we like to research, obviously, with salary. Many of you have come across Glassdoor and PayScale. There's a goldmine of information in Friends, other online research. Sometimes Reddit's got some interesting information. I even say make friends with recruiters. Like people who do, you might be able to find out from them what salaries are looking like. I'm always here to bounce something as well. Commit, I'm sure, is very supportive in sharing whatever they can. So getting information from any source you possibly can really help you narrow down your data points into something a little bit more substantial. There might even be information on the company website. You would not believe how many people I interviewed that haven't even looked at the company website, especially in high demand roles where people feel like they don't have to do very much. And you might think, well, I'm in demand, I don't have to do very much. So then you might not get very much more than if you had done the preparation. So even though I know it's a pain in the butt sometimes because there's lots of companies, lots of interviews, and nothing completely is ever guaranteed to work out, as much as you can, doing some extra research is going to pay off in the long term, at least statistically from what I see. And you know, take time beforehand to write out what you want your whole desired compensation package to be. Aldrich, I think it was Aldrich that mentioned this, is what we were talking about. So, you know, a big, huge list, as long as you want, like even if it's like cool gear, what does that look like? But flexible paid time off, vacation time, right? If they have unlimited vacation, maybe you want to ask them about, you know, what's the precedent for that vacation? What are the, you know, are people taking 2 weeks? Or are they taking 4 weeks? You know, how much does a CEO take a year? That's a usually good indicator of unlimited vacation. Some people are nodding their heads. Yeah, unlimited vacations, pluses and minuses. Flexible work hours, remote work, right? Equity, you know, it can be a bit confusing, but when you're in the startup phase, if they are doing equity, you can ask for some comparisons. Be like, okay, so what are other people in this role tending to get in terms of a range for equity? And in really small companies, you can actually talk about numbers of shares. When you get bigger, it gets a little bit hard because it comes apples to oranges. Talking about your sweeteners and perks, right? So the ones we covered off before, monetary, non-monetary, you know, just like Nick was talking about, there are some other perks or benefits arrangements that could be non-negotiables for you that can end up being really favorable terms in a compensation negotiation conversation. Other items that can impact compensation negotiation, I just want to throw these in here, is just know the job description. I've been a recruiter long enough to see, and I'm sure some of you who are hiring managers and leads in your roles, sometimes the job slightly changes from the first time you open it to when you finally get towards the hire. Needs, understanding, oh, we need that, or a candidate might trigger something in a hiring manager, be like, oh, wow, we really do need SaaS experience or something like that. Know the job description, listen for it, because that could change. If it does, then that might be a place that you can look at negotiating your salary or compensation, because it might be more increased responsibility in scope of role. Okay. And then next, under prepare, we're going to cover off EVP. So employee value proposition, some of you might have heard this before, I bet. It's the promise of an employer to employees in return for their commitment. All the benefits, all the rewards. But in addition to the branded benefits of an organization, you want to find out these super important pieces of a company. And I'm going to elevate things a little bit for all y'all, because So many people don't do this, but because you have your pick a lot in engineering, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but being really deliberate about these types of elements can help you find a company that's going to last and be worth your while. So company performance. So as far as a startup goes, you're going to be asking them as much as you can because they're a private company, right? They haven't gone public usually at startups. So company performance. And you can interview people in the company, maybe some context around it. Funding, this is really interesting. Has anyone ever investigated funding before? I'm curious. Okay, good, I'm seeing some nods. It's like, so are you seed round? Are you Series A? Usually with startups, they're an angel, you know, they're really early stage and they haven't had very much input in. So if there's a way to find it out where you're not being too invasive, and you got to feel it carefully, and I'll teach you how with the C on this framework, how to ask these questions. If you can find out in terms of the funding piece, you can, like I've had a company, they're like, oh yeah, we'll totally give you budget for a whole team and this will be totally great. And I'm like, great, so how much funding have you got? And they gave me the number, and then I calculate, and then they told me about their run rate. And this is a little more in depth. But then at the end of the day, I was like, you have no money. They had no cash. They couldn't promise me what they said they were doing. They were just selling me. So there's some interesting pieces there. And another piece is the company roadmap. Like, what are they trying to do? What's the mission laid out? What is like, not just your job, but how does your job fit into the company roadmap? And does it look like it makes sense? Because some startups are wonderful ideas, but as to where they go. And the leadership team and track record, look them up on LinkedIn. I didn't mention Crunchbase before. It's a great resource to dig in just a little bit deeper about companies, and see if you can find some publications. The more you read, the better, because you're looking for levers to pull. Culture, you know, so many people don't realize how much companies live and die by culture. Has anyone been part of horrible cultures? Right? Yeah, all of us. I have too. So understanding this is part of their proposition to you. This is part of their value, is the culture that they provide. And of course, many, many more. And I also say informational interviewing people at the organization. Even if you aren't thinking of a job at a particular place, you're curious, informational interviewing is where you interview when there's no job. I usually recommend to people maybe once a quarter, you know, find someone at an interesting company you want to know more about, an informational interview, and you start to build your network, and then you start to build your ability to collect information, and maybe they know something about the company in the future that you're going to interview at. Okay, tons of info. Everyone doing okay? Okay, awesome. So the other piece about prepare is MVP. Now this one is really, really, really important. It stands for my value proposition. Yes, you are MVPs too. Basically, knowing your worth. So how do we do this? Okay, we're going to start with the easy parts. First, skills. Okay, so how like what kind of skills do you have? Usually we talk about hard skills. It's like, you know, am I Ruby developer? Am I, you know, working with C#? Am I systems admin? Am I DevOps? Understanding very clearly the top pieces that you feel you are skilled at. Side note, I think all of you know this, but when someone says, okay, so you know Ruby on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? 10 being the highest. If you say 10, they won't hire you, or they'll roll their eyes, because 10 means you invented the language, FYI. That's what recruiters talk about. And then experience. So experience, you can harvest really well thinking about your experience, how to talk about this. And I know I'm giving you all lots of homework, you're being good sports, but when you're thinking about your experience, you can harvest a lot if you think about your proudest moments. And so the nice thing about that is when you think of your proudest moments in terms of the experience you've had, you're going to have an energy around that experience. It's going to come across when you're negotiating, when you're talking about it, or even when you're in the interview process itself. In addition, with experience, hiring managers and recruiters tend to think of things a little bit categorically. So they think of things like high growth environment experience, startup experience, customer facing, service or product, you know, experience. Those types of catch-alls, it's really handy to think of your experience like, oh, where does it fit? Because a SaaS company that is a product company is going to be just starting out, they're going to be really curious if you've done SaaS and you've dealt with product. Okay. Also having a Git count with work to show that's part of your experience, whether it's Git or any of the other types of platforms that resonate. Maybe there's something even cooler that I'm not even aware of. The other part is gaps. So, what you don't like to do usually with gaps is how I would like to frame this. But gaps can also just be like, kind of unsure. So a gap that's kind of like concrete would be like, I'm not familiar with Ruby, period, end of story. And you're talking to a company without Ruby, it's like, okay, they need to know that, but they also, you for yourself, you need to know if they're a learning culture, are they going to teach you? And then another one, I love working in a team. So remote is hard for me. So you could consider that like a gap for you in the sense like I'm not strong in remote environments. So I need to make sure that I understand that. And then I can pull those levers when I'm trying to negotiate. This one's really huge, is strengths. We're going to dive into this more. They're so important because they help feature your authentic and unique self. And you're just like, are we getting fluffy? We're not getting fluffy. This is the really important stuff that helps you stand out just as you are. So much in our schools and in society are trying to like jam us into a mold that they think that we need to be and a checkbox that we need to be. But when we're recruiters, we're looking for, or hiring managers, or even CEOs with a vision and inspiration, we're looking for people who are authentically who they are, and they have self-awareness around that, and they can articulate it. And that is one of the most powerful pieces of negotiation out there. So it's not just successful negotiation though, when you're harnessing authentic, unique self and articulating it, it's also fulfilled ones. Has anyone here heard about Marcus Buckingham before? You might have heard him through StrengthsFinder. Yeah, maybe a couple. So he's got a huge thing called StrengthsFinder, which is really fascinating if you want to understand more about your strengths. But the blazing glory of his work to me has been that he changes the definition of strengths. And this is how I look at strengths as well. And strengths are things that you're good at most times, plus you love them. So for me, if you ask me to do detail, I can certainly do it. I'm good at it. You have to be. There's a lot of metrics involved in recruiting. But if you ask me to maintain it, I'd rather put an ice pick in my eye. And so based on Marcus Buckingham's definition of strengths, there are things that energize you that would not be a strength. Oops. And that also means that things that energize you, sometimes you might not be as good at yet, but maybe you're developing. You would just have to understand that. So when you're thinking about yourself, like, what am I strong at? How do I communicate my strengths, my authentic, unique self? When you're looking at your strengths, think about what energizes me. Remember when I said, look back on your proudest moments as experience? That's another tool to identify where your strengths lie. And if you're kind of stuck on this, there's a lovely tool he came up with called the like-load list. And this is something that's really interesting, especially for you data people, is to harvest this data on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. And you just basically keep a little pad of paper nearby, and you just keep track. What am I liking? What am I loathing today? And they're little breadcrumbs. I call with coaching clients breadcrumbs of joy, or the liking stuff. They're little cues that help you understand what you like. And these are the foundational pieces that can help you understand more about your strengths, where you really sit, where you're energized. Because so much of us is like, have to be this because they tell me, have to be that because a company tells me. As a recruiter, I hire the people who know themselves and understand how they fit within the piece of the puzzle that I'm trying to put together. Make sense? It's a lot, hey? You guys are being good sports. Woohoo! All right. So, and I also say it's also important to purely basically because when we fail to recognize our own value, we're vulnerable to accepting less than what we're entitled to, right? So that's a huge piece of it. Now, take a second here. Even if you know your value on paper, how does that translate effectively in the interview process? Well, this is where we're going to move on to one of the most important but underrated pieces of negotiation, which is your state. First of all, has anyone tried to negotiate in a very anxious, imposter syndrome mental state before? Yeah. And how successful was that? Like, how did that go?
For me, it went quite well. I usually psych myself out and then do well in the interview.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're grace under pressure, right?
Yeah, it can work out that way. You know, it's not ideal. There's definitely the one place I'm thinking of. It was just the pandemic threw me into a sudden employment change, and so that was, I'd been working one place and this that had a different set of skills in this one. So I was, yeah, tried to strike the balance between saying truthfully what I know, but also, you know, speaking to my strengths.
That's awesome. Well, we aspire to be more like that, because your mental state is everything, and your mental, so we call it mental hygiene. So brushing your mental teeth before you go into a negotiation process. So are you going in jaded and competitive? Are you going in feeling desperate? We want to kind of like wash that up and try and find ourselves in a neutral place. One way you can hack that, because sometimes the brain's really, or the mind is nasty and it holds on to it, is using the physical. Some of you might have heard this one before, like standing in the superhero pose. You can hack it by, for 2 minutes before your negotiation, stand in the superhero pose, slow, deep breaths, at least 3 breaths with double the exhale. So in for 3, out for 6. Super, super powerful. Doing 3 breaths, in for 3, out for 6, and then a gentle smile on your face, and you will change. You're going to signal to your nervous system that, hey, everything's cool, we got this, right? So don't underestimate your physical, huge. And then framing the experience as learning. You won't be guaranteed a job, so maybe you learn something along the way, and the job is a bonus. That's one way a lot of people have talked about things. So we've emphasized prepare a lot. Prepare. Okay, Teresa, tell us something new. Now we're going to move on to the I of the PIC framework. So the I stands for invite the company to dance. And so what the heck does this mean? Well, we're going to model it. And the first way we're going to model it is with asking questions with questions. Okay, so Daniel, you ready? We're going to pull off my shared screen here, and Daniel and I are going to demo for you. Where's Daniel? Wave to me, Daniel. I can't see you. Ah, there you are. Thank you. See your faces. All right, your mic's off. Okay, we're going to do this. This is a little demo of one kind of a salary negotiation, because there are infinite varieties of salary negotiations. All right, Dan, you ready?
Sure. And should we just preface this with, this is what not to do?
Yes, that's right. Thank you for the reminder. This is what not, all right, we could have got, yeah, get you guys to figure it out. Okay, go ahead, Daniel.
All right. So Teresa, what salary are you looking to make?
140.
That's higher than what we can do.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Well, we're definitely lower. 130,000 would be our high end.
Well, I'm not interested in going lower.
I'm really sorry, that is our limit.
How did you guys feel when you hear that? Any comments?
Sounds
a bit
like
awkward.
me.
Sound like you, Nolan? It can work. It can. I heard a woman's voice. Who's that?
Oh, that was just me. I just was, it seemed a bit like didn't have the flow, essentially.
Yeah. Did I kind of look like I'm not willing to negotiate? Yeah, and that's a tactic. It can work. That's fine. And in some instances, I'm saying what not to do. In my experience as a recruiter, it might not get you what you want. I'll elaborate on it. Let's show you an example of another way to do it. Because remember, you can get what you want. It's just there might be a price you're going to pay that you don't know about. Okay, go ahead, Daniel.
Teresa, you're a really great candidate, and we'd like to move forward with hiring you. What salary are you looking to make?
Oh, awesome. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I've heard roles like this typically earn $130,000 to $140,000 a year.
Almost. Ours is a little bit lower.
Do you have a range for this position?
We hire within the range of about 120 to 130,000.
Well, I'm hoping to do 130,000 up. Is that possible for you?
Well, at 130,000, we'd be at the top end, and we'd be able to see if that is a match based on our interview process.
Okay, I can work with that. Any comments? What do you notice?
Well, you sounded a lot more inviting this time, and that would help the HR person want to work with you on finding a balance.
Hit the nail on the head, right? So you might think in the first one, you got what you want. But in the second one, how, like in the first, well, actually I should say in the first one, what are the odds that your recruiter is going to go the distance for you? What are the odds that they're going to fight for you? Higher or lower?
Lower, of course.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so more inviting. And then what else did you notice, Alejandro?
So, I mean, I'm coming back to the slide you had inviting the company to dance. Like it felt you were making the effort of finding a middle ground, finding a place, right? You didn't state what you wanted at first. You started with, oh, what are you offering? And you pressured on, tell me what you're offering first. The first person who say a number loses, right? And
so that's perfect, Alejandro. Thank you for that. So when I first introduce this concept, sometimes when I say answer questions with questions, people are like, oh my gosh, that's going to be annoying. That's not going to work. Did you guys notice that I answered every single thing practically with questions? And did it sound annoying?
You also demonstrated some knowledge of the industry by stating your research had been done.
And why? Yes, because I did what? I prepared. Oh my God. I know, right? So you can ask questions with questions, not all the time. You know, there is a caveat. Oops, I'm not on my PowerPoint. There is a caveat that you don't, not every time it's appropriate, but it is an interesting skill to develop. And one I was talking with Martha about at the beginning, you can role play with your friends and try it out. Maybe even try it on your teenager. It's an interesting negotiation tactic that helps you get more information. You want more information for your negotiation. The other thing though, just to be careful of, and we're not going to go into it because there's so many things to go into in terms of compensation negotiation, is the anchor. So I said 130 to 140, knowing that I was fine with 130 because the lowest number is the anchor, and psychologically that's what they'll hit too. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen back. I have to make sure my time is going good. How's our time? Let's see, we're at 12:46. Okay, so we're going to zoom through the next piece here, just like I mentioned, not every time with questions. All right, there. So this is where I say, take a picture. This is exactly some of the words that we were using. Very, very powerful. Just these two lines. If there's one thing you take, you can do incredible super sleuth detective work with your recruiter or even your HR person when you're talking with people. Remember that ranges are not necessarily common in startups, but sometimes they think in terms of ranges. Bigger companies have bands, they'll have a little more formalized process, but ranges can help as well. But none of this asking questions with questions really works unless, as Alejandro was alluding to, we're inviting. This is the C of the framework. Super important, and so many people don't do it. And it's like this untapped, massive potential in negotiation, which is collaborate. Put a nice little cheesy B there to make you smile, to remember at. Remember, the little B is to remember that we want bees with honey, not vinegar. Authentic and open. In fact, there is a really interesting HBR study that supports collaboration. So they had 5 different types of negotiations styles in the study, but long story short, at the end of the day, they found out that people that used competitive and collaborative styles in negotiation were basically able to, going to my notes here, they increased their starting pay by an average of $5,000. 5,000 seems to be the magic number, using competing and collaborating strategies. So, but the interesting thing is you think, well, competitive, Teresa. I'm like, yes, it can work. Remember, I'm never saying these things don't work, but from my experience, what I've seen behind the curtain, collaboration tends to work really well. The people who behaved competitively did better, but collaborators were more satisfied than competitive bargainers with the negotiation process. And the other ones had no difference on their negotiation success whatsoever. I can say from the recruiter perspective again, that I'm going to keep in touch with you. I'm going to help you in the future. We're going to work together. Like if you collaborate with me, I'm going to collaborate with you. That's at least a perspective from me. In terms of startups of considerations, remember that they don't necessarily have skilled recruiters. And to be honest, there's a lot of recruiters who aren't very skilled out there too. But it's not necessarily a process that's been thought out thoroughly. So you got to give them the benefit of the doubt and but also, even though their interview process might be a little more jerky in the startup world, it also is an indicator about what that company really is like. So you're getting data points that you can take or not take. So here's another pocket phrase. So under collaborate. So we want to be transparent, optimistic that you can work together. So company hasn't discussed compensation. This happens a lot, especially with startups. We're like, yeah, let's talk, leave the compensation for later. This can be either email or this can be something that you can say to people. Really excited, want to check in before we move forward, make sure it's aligned. Then I can really focus on interviewing really well because we're all aligned. I tend to like to recommend getting the compensation conversation started at the beginning of the process, but there are exceptions. And then here's another one. You've got another offer, but you want to juggle. This happens to all of the people in engineering quite often. Timing can be an issue, right? So this is a nice way. This is a great email, lovely template for you. Click, click. And you have every right to explore multiple offers at the same time. How you do it, though, will help ensure your ability to negotiate your success. Okay? And remember, they're going to show these slides if you don't get a picture or get it in time. Now, one of my most favorite phrases ever is, correct me if I'm wrong. Has anyone ever used this phrase before? I can't see everyone. Yeah, I know, Dal, you used it. Correct me if I'm wrong, blah, 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 blah. You can use it with anyone, anywhere in your life. You would not believe how much it disarms and takes all sorts of edginess out of a conversation. You can amend that to, I've heard people make 100 grand, tell me where I'm wrong. You can even say that at the end of a sentence. It's actually a coach trick. So now I've just given you a coach trick I paid thousands of dollars in training for. Bonus. Okay. So this is, we're getting right to the end. Oh my goodness, our time is good. We're gonna have time for questions. I know this is a lot of information and this seems very quick, but I'm just curious, given what we've talked about and what you've shared, would anyone throw in the chat or maybe we can take one comment. What's one thing that you would do differently based on what you've learned in the seminar today?
I might actually attempt a negotiation for once.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, like you can experiment. This is your life. Like we're only doing this so that you get the better salary that you're hoping for, at least share some information that shows that you can do it. But it's really your choice. You can go along the waves or you can zoom through like a motorboat, right? Yeah, it's totally your choice. And maybe one's the other, not looking at it binary. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing, Nolan. Awesome. So then in terms of recap, we talked about what is compensation. Remember, it's not just salary. Make the big list, your dream list, and then weigh it out, what's important to you. So when you walk in there, just like we talked about really interesting creative conversations with Nick, a wonderful example, and other people, I'm sure tons of you, if we had more time, we'd have lots more to harvest in terms of creative compensation negotiation strategies. And then we talked about how to negotiate. So this prepare. I can't say enough about preparing, inviting them to dance, try that skill, maybe get some friends and some glasses of wine and see if you can try this. And then collaborate, putting it around in collaboration. Remember, we talked about startups and companies. They might not be perfect. You might be preparing and inviting and collaborating till the cow comes home. And they're still awkward and jerky. And that's where you get to understand if it's part of being a startup or it's not a company that you feel aligned with. And then don't forget the pocket phrases. Sometimes those are great. You just print them, cut them out, stick them in your notebook. And then when you get pulled into a conversation, maybe down even on your performance, and you're looking at increasing your compensation with your manager, you can use some of those pocket phrases. Okay, so now we're just going to jump into some Q&A. Wonderful, and I'm going to pull off the screen share so I can see your wonderful faces.
So Teresa, I just noted down some of the questions you received in the chat.
Thank you.
So just beginning with what Aldrich asked, I think he just wanted some clarification around something said earlier, and that was benefits equal 15 to 30% of your base salary.
Okay, hang on one second. There we go. Sorry, I've just lost my Zoom window for some reason. Here we go. Okay, great. Can you see that one more time?
Sure, yeah. So just clarification around the value of benefits. I think we had mentioned earlier something they're worth 30%, but he just wants to know, so benefits are worth 15 to 30% of your base salary.
Yeah. So when has anyone consulted before? Usually when you're, yeah, right. So with consultants, you take a base salary and then you add anywhere between 15 to 30% to account for the fact that you're not getting benefits, vacation time, and perks. So it depends on the range. I believe the example before was that there was no, like there was a piece of the benefits missing. So then you would want to adjust that percentage lower to account for that. Does that make sense? Have I answered your question?
Yes, that makes sense. But what about the scenario where vacation is provided or PTO, but not like health benefits? So you know how in like Canada and US, like there's like a US corporation that doesn't have a corporation in Canada. And so they don't offer benefits.
They don't
offer
kind of like
percentage. Yeah, they don't offer that, but they say, oh yeah, you can still get PTO or vacation time. Yeah,
that's a really good, yeah, that's a really good question. If they're just paying you like a contractor because they're not set up in Canada, then you have to negotiate like one. So adding those things, really quick trick is if their company precedent is say 2 weeks vacation, which you're using the US, which sadly that's the case in many US companies, 2% of your salary is equal to 1 week of vacation. So if you ever want to quantify how much your vacation is worth, this doesn't work for unlimited so well, but you know, 2%. So if it's a 4 weeks vacation, add 4%, or sorry, 2 times 4 is 8% to your compensation calculation. Does that help?
Yeah.
Super.
I think the thing I'm asking more about is like health benefits.
Yeah. They're not as
good.
Well, they're not as good in the States anyways, in some respects, depending on, but it depends on the company. But we can take that one offline. I can go specific with you on. Yeah, you've got my email? Okay, don't forget my email. Awesome. Good.
Great. And just moving along here. So there was a couple questions just around equity and stock options. So I'll just kind of combine both of them. So the first part was just there being a bit of confusion and uncertainty around it, and what questions you would ask about equity and stock options, and then just any recommendations or resources for how to evaluate the equity portion of an offer.
Yeah, so equity is pretty challenging because private companies don't have to tell you anything. They really don't. They can say, here's a stock certificate and here's the number. So when you're at the very beginning of a process, you want to understand if they've said a number to you, say it's like 12,000 stock options, and I'm just pulling a number out of my head that's not material to any reference whatsoever. So say it's 12,000 stock options, I'll be like, okay, so you know what, you know, for this level of position, say I'm a senior level engineer, you know, what is the range in terms of stock options you're giving people? And maybe you're the only engineer and be like, okay, are there comparative positions? Like, is that what you're giving out most people? Or do you, like, you want to ask as many questions as possible because you get to find out how prepared and how knowledgeable they are, or if they're just throwing stock out there. Because there are some startups out there that are not even very versed on stock and equity themselves. So you want to find out, like, are you guys giving out this much to every employee, like the same amount? Are you giving out different amounts? Remember, asking questions with questions, collaborating. So you're coming with a really warm, you know, persona and be like, oh yeah, like how's that going for you? Is it working? Are people pretty happy with it? The equity piece is like, so you get the number, and then when you're getting closer, they might actually tell you like a strike price, like in terms of what that number is representative. But in terms of equity, if you search online how to negotiate equity with startups, there's a ton of resources on that particular search that you can find. But the other thing to remember is equity doesn't mean anything without time and an event. Okay, so most have 4 years that the stock has to vest, usually a cliff, so you can't do anything for the first year. So 4 years of vesting, and then they need to have some kind of liquidation event, which is they need to have either be acquired or acquire or be IPO. So when you're doing that preparation piece where you're going through the interview process, you'd be like, okay, so we talked about company roadmap. What are the plans for this company? Is this one of those startups that's like being built to be sold? because there are ones, and you don't say that language because that language might put them on the guard, but like, you know, do you guys have a 2 or 3 year plan? Like, are you hoping to be acquired? Are you hoping to be bought? And they might go a little bit vague. And so then if they're going to be vague, maybe you can find someone else in the company to talk to that might get a little more specific with you, because the stock and the equity number mean nothing if you do not have confidence in time and liquidity. Does that make sense? Yeah, we can go into numbers, but it gets super complex. But at the very least, make sure you understand if it's a healthy startup, a healthy company. Think of like, you know, oh, if there's a recession coming or the macroeconomics going weird, you know, what are your plans to go public when nobody else is doing it, right? And so maybe they're a quick startup. That's a really valid question. Does that make sense? Okay, good. We're scratching the surface, I recognize. So you're getting a bit, not all, but you're getting a bit. How about another question, Daniel?
Yeah, let's just do one quick one before we wrap up here. Nolan asked, what's the difference between a salary range and salary band?
Oh yeah, so salary range is, they're kind of the same thing, but startups will usually not have a formalized banding system yet. So banding, you know, you'll see companies that have super keen HR that has to scale things, and so they have to put stuff in a framework, and a framework is usually a salary banding situation. So that's usually for bigger companies. Although you never know, maybe you've got a super keen HR person in a startup and they might have bands right off the bat, usually rare. So range is a softer way. Like a lot of people are be thinking one number, but a range, if you ask for range, you're going to get a lot more information than if you just ask for a single number. Because now you've got the low and you've got the high, and that gives you more leverage in how you negotiate. So remember, negotiation, the more information, the more power you have in negotiation. That's why I spent so much time on prepare, and then so much time in collaborating and inviting them to dance, because you want to get as much information as possible. And so when you ask for ranges, you get more information. And then bands, that's for bigger companies. And they'll actually have formalized bands, and they usually can't move beyond them, or if they can, it's an exception to the rule. Does that help, Noah? Oh, I'm hearing the sound of my voice talking a lot. I would prefer having much more, but I was like, oh, there's so much to tell all of you. Anything else we can squeeze in, or are we at time?
I think we're at time here. So just to be respectful of everyone's schedule, just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Teresa, for that great presentation. We will be following up after this event just with a post-event email where we can share the recording with you and some other resources, as well as Teresa's contact information if you have any follow-up questions. She's been kind enough to offer to speak with you offline if there's things that we couldn't address today.
I love engineers. Yep. You can ask me any questions. It's a hard process doing this, so I'm here if anyone wants to chat.
So thank you so much for attending. We've got another event going on tomorrow. It's going to be called Dev House, happening at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And we're going to be talking a bit about React Native, and Node.js and Expo for developing an app. So if you're free to attend, we'd love to see you there. But if not, we hope to see you again soon at future workshops.